I killed a child on August 17th, 1944. I can tell you the date because I wrote it down that night, not in a diary, just on the edge of a map I was carrying. I do not know why I marked it. Maybe because some part of me already understood that this day would stay with me longer than any medal or any scar. The island had no name that mattered to us. Command called it Hill 73 or Objective Baker or some other clean word that let them pretend it was a chess piece and not a place where men died screaming into coral dust. It was one of 1,000 Pacific islands that all looked the same from the air. Green, humid, hostile, small enough to cross in an hour, and large enough to hide an army in caves. We had been fighting for 11 days. Not continuous fighting, not the kind you see in movies where bullets never stop. Real combat is slower. You move 50 meters and wait. You check for wire. You scan the tree line. You drink water that tastes like metal and iodine. You try not to think about the men who were walking beside you 2 days ago and are not walking beside you now. The heat was the kind that does not just make you sweat. It makes you stupid. Your thoughts slow down. Your reactions dull. Your mouth stays dry no matter how much you drink. The jungle trapped the heat like an oven, and the coral underfoot reflected it back up, so you baked from both sides at once. We were moving through a narrow strip of ground between a ridge and a swamp. The vegetation was dense, the kind where vines grab at your gear, and every shadow looks like it might be hiding a man. The Japanese had been on this island for 2 years. They knew every rock, every cave, every line of sight. We were the intruders, and they made sure we felt it. That morning, 3 men in our platoon had triggered a booby trap. 1 died instantly. The other 2 were evacuated. We were down to 18 men from the original 32. Replacements kept arriving, but they did not last long enough for you to learn their names. I was a sergeant, 23 years old enough to vote, but not old enough to understand what I was being asked to do. The lieutenant, a man named Garrison, led us forward in a staggered line. He was good, careful, did not take stupid risks. But careful only gets you so far when the enemy has had 2 years to prepare the ground. We moved through the jungle in silence. No one spoke unless absolutely necessary. Speaking meant giving away your position. Speaking meant inviting a bullet. I carried an M1 Garand, 48 rounds in my belt, 2 grenades, a canteen, a first aid kit, and a growing sense that the island itself wanted us dead. Not the Japanese. The island, the jungle, the heat, the insects, the coral that cut through boots, the vines that tripped you, the air that felt too thick to breathe. Around noon, we reached a clearing. Not a full clearing, just a gap where the trees thinned and the sunlight came through in hard white beams. The ground was uneven, littered with broken rock and fallen palm fronds. Across the clearing, maybe 60 meters away, was a coral ridge with dark openings. Caves. Caves were the worst part of the Pacific War. You could not see inside them. You could not know their depth. A cave could hold 1 man or 20. It could have tunnels that connected to other caves, turning the whole ridge into a hidden fortress. Clearing a cave meant going in blind, and going in blind meant dying. Garrison held up a fist. We stopped. He scanned the ridge with binoculars, moving slowly, checking every shadow. I crouched low, my rifle ready, my eyes on the tree line to our left. Flanking fire was a favorite Japanese tactic. Pin you from the front, kill you from the side. Nothing moved. Garrison lowered the binoculars and signaled 2 men forward to probe the clearing. They moved slowly, watching the ground for wire, watching the ridge for movement. They made it halfway across before the first shot cracked out. The sound was sharp, high, not the deep boom of an American rifle, but the flatter snap of a Japanese Type 38. One of the men dropped instantly. The other dove behind a rock. We returned fire, not aimed shots, just suppressing fire to keep the shooter pinned. Muzzle flashes flickered from the ridge. 3 positions, maybe 4. We were outnumbered or at least outpositioned. Garrison shouted orders, his voice barely audible over the gunfire. Half the squad shifted right to flank. I stayed center with 4 others, laying down cover fire. The shooting went on for maybe 3 minutes, though it felt longer. Time warps in combat. Seconds stretch. Minutes compress. You stop thinking in terms of hours and start thinking in terms of breaths. Then the fire from the ridge stopped. Not gradually. Suddenly. Like someone had shut a door. Garrison raised a hand. Cease fire. We stopped shooting. The jungle went quiet again, except for the distant sound of surf and the ringing in my ears. We waited. Combat teaches you patience. You do not rush toward silence. Silence can be a trap. After 2 full minutes, Garrison signaled us forward. We moved in pairs, covering each other, rifles up, fingers on triggers. The man who had been hit lay face down in the dirt, dead. We could not stop for him. Stopping meant dying beside him. We reached the base of the ridge. The caves were smaller than they looked from across the clearing, just shallow depressions in the rock, not deep tunnels. Empty. The Japanese had fired and retreated, probably into a larger cave system farther back. Garrison swore under his breath. He knew what this meant. We would have to go in after them. But first, we had to secure the immediate area. He split us into 2 groups. 3 men stayed to watch the ridge. The rest of us swept the flanks, checking for hidden positions, checking for more wire. I moved left with 2 others, a private named Kowalski and a corporal named Hayes. We pushed through thick undergrowth, moving slow, eyes down, watching for trip lines. That is when I saw him. He was crouched behind a low coral outcrop maybe 15 meters ahead, partially hidden by a tangle of vines. At first I thought he was one of ours. The angle was wrong. The light was bad. But then I saw the uniform, the mustard yellow-green that the Japanese wore, and my body reacted before my brain finished processing. I brought my rifle up. He saw me at the same instant and started to raise his weapon. Everything slowed. I saw his face clearly for the first time. Thin. Young. Too young. His helmet was too big. His uniform hung loose. He looked like a boy wearing his father's clothes. His rifle was a Type 38, longer than he was tall. He struggled to lift it, his hands shaking. I had half a second to decide. Training took over. Muscle memory, sight picture, breath control. Squeeze. The rifle kicked. The boy fell backward. The sound of the shot echoed and faded. Kowalski and Hayes moved up, scanning for more threats. I stayed where I was. Rifles still raised, eyes locked on the spot where the boy had been. We approached carefully. Kowalski checked the flanks. Hayes kept his rifle trained on the body. I moved forward, my boots crunching on coral. The boy lay on his back, eyes open, mouth slightly parted. Blood spread slowly across his chest, soaking into the fabric. His rifle had fallen beside him, still clutched in one hand. He was 15, maybe 16, maybe younger. Hard to tell with the dead. They all looked smaller once they stopped moving. His face was smooth, no stubble, no scars. His hands were thin, the kind that had never done hard labor. His uniform was threadbare, patched in places. His boots were worn through at the toes. I stood over him and felt nothing. That is the truth. In the moment, I felt nothing. No guilt, no triumph, no horror, just emptiness. Kowalski knelt and checked the body for documents. Standard procedure. The Japanese often carried maps, orders, anything that might give us intelligence. He found a small cloth bundle in the boy's breast pocket, wrapped carefully, tied with string. He opened it. Inside was a notebook, small, maybe 4 inches by 6 inches, bound with thread. The cover was stained and worn. The pages were filled with dense Japanese characters. A diary. Kowalski handed it to me. I looked at it for a moment, then put it in my pack without thinking. We did not have time to read it. We had to keep moving. We rejoined the squad. Garrison asked if we found anything. I told him 1 enemy KIA, no weapons cache, no intel. I did not mention the diary. I do not know why. Maybe because it felt private. Maybe because I did not want to share it with anyone. We moved on. That night, we dug in on high ground half a mile from the ridge. No fires, no talking, just exhaustion and the smell of sweat and gun oil. I sat with my back against a tree and pulled out the diary. I could not read it. The characters meant nothing to me, but I opened it anyway and looked at the pages. There were drawings, simple sketches, a house, a woman, a small child, a tree, careful, deliberate lines drawn by someone who cared about getting them right. I closed the diary and put it back in my pack. I told myself it did not matter. He was the enemy. He aimed at me. I shot first. That is war. That is survival. But that night, I could not sleep. I kept seeing his face, not twisted in pain, not frozen in death, just calm, young, a boy who should have been in school. I killed a child on August 17th, 1944, and I did not know yet that 3 days later I would understand exactly who he was. 3 days passed before I opened the diary again. 3 days of moving through jungle that felt like it was trying to digest us. 3 days of clearing caves with flamethrowers and satchel charges. 3 days of watching men I barely knew get carried back on stretchers or wrapped in ponchos. 3 days of pretending the war was simple, that every man you killed deserved it, that survival was the same thing as being right. On the third night, we set up a temporary command post in a captured Japanese bunker. It was partially collapsed, but the roof still held, and that meant we could use lights without giving away our position. The walls were concrete, thick, poured with care. The Japanese had built this place to last. It almost felt like shelter, except for the smell of old blood and cordite that nothing could cover. I sat on an empty ammunition crate in the corner, my rifle leaning against the wall beside me. The other men were cleaning weapons, writing letters home, or sleeping in shifts. The lieutenant was outside coordinating with another unit. For the first time in days, I had a few minutes where no one needed me to do anything. I pulled the diary from my pack. It was heavier than it should have been. Paper does not weigh much. Ink does not weigh much. But guilt weighs plenty. I opened it to the first page. Japanese characters stared back at me, neat and controlled. I could not read a single word. I flipped through slowly. More writing, more drawings. A sketch of a boat, a sketch of mountains, a sketch of a small dog. Every page felt like an accusation. A corporal named Brennan walked past, saw me holding the diary, and stopped. "What is that?" I almost closed it, almost lied, but something made me answer honestly. "Diary. Off a Japanese soldier." Brennan raised an eyebrow. "You keeping souvenirs now?" I did not answer. He shrugged and walked away. But his question stayed in my head. Was I keeping it as a souvenir? Like a trophy? Like proof I had killed someone? No, that was not it. I did not know what it was yet, but it was not that. An hour later, Lieutenant Garrison came in with a prisoner, not a combatant. A Japanese civilian, maybe 50 years old, thin, wearing torn clothes that might have been a teacher's uniform once. He had been found hiding in a cave with no weapon, no uniform, just fear. The regulations said we had to process him, get whatever intelligence we could, then send him back to the holding area. Garrison sat him down on a crate and asked if he spoke English. The man nodded. A little, not much. Garrison tried a few questions. Where were the other troops? How many? What supplies? The man answered slowly, carefully, his English broken but understandable. He did not seem dangerous. He seemed exhausted. I watched from across the room, still holding the diary. Then, without planning it, I stood up and walked over. Garrison looked at me. "What do you need, Sergeant?" I held up the diary. "Can he read this?" Garrison frowned. "Why?" "I do not know. I just want to know what it says." Garrison looked at the prisoner, then back at me, then shrugged. "Ask him." I handed the diary to the man. His eyes widened when he saw it. He opened it carefully, as if it might fall apart in his hands. He read the first page, then the second. His face changed. The exhaustion became something else. Sadness, maybe, or recognition. He looked up at me. "Where did you get this?" "Off a soldier. 3 days ago." He nodded slowly, like he had expected that answer. He turned more pages. His hands started to shake. "This is a boy." "I know." He looked at me, and I saw something in his eyes that I did not want to see. Pity. Not for the boy. For me. "You want me to translate?" "Yes." He hesitated. "This will not help you." "I do not care. I need to know what it says." He stared at me for a long moment. Then he nodded. He read silently for a while, turning pages, his lips moving slightly. Then he began to speak. His name was Takeshi Yamamoto, 15 years old, from a village near Hiroshima. He was a student before the war. He liked drawing. He wanted to be a teacher. I sat down on the floor, my back against the wall, and listened. The man continued. "The diary starts in April. Takeshi writes about school, about his mother, about his younger sister, who is 8. He draws pictures of them. He writes that his father died 2 years ago in China. He writes that his mother works in a factory now. He writes that he tries to help, but he is not strong enough to do the heavy work." The man turned a page. In May, he writes that the local garrison is recruiting boys 16 and older. He is only 15, but they are not checking carefully anymore. His teacher tells the class that serving the emperor is the highest honor, that dying for the homeland is beautiful. Takeshi writes that he does not feel honored. He writes that he is afraid. My throat tightened. In June, he is conscripted. He writes that his mother cried. He writes that his sister did not understand why he had to leave. He draws a picture of them standing at the door of their house, waving. He writes underneath, "I will come back. I promised." The man paused. His voice was quieter now. In July, he is sent to this island. He writes about the training, about the older soldiers who yell at him, about the heat, about the food, which is mostly rice and sometimes fish, but never enough. He writes that he is always hungry. He writes that he cannot sleep because he hears bombing every night. I closed my eyes. In August, he writes less. The entries are shorter. He writes that many of the older soldiers have been killed. He writes that the Americans are coming closer. He writes that his unit is down to 12 men, and half of them are younger than 16. He writes that his sergeant told them they must fight to the death, that surrender is treason, that their families will be shamed if they run. The man turned to the last page. The final entry is August 14th, 3 days before you killed him. He writes, "I am so tired, I do not think I will see my mother again. If anyone finds this, please tell her I was not brave. I was only afraid, but I tried. Please tell her I tried." The man closed the diary and handed it back to me. That is all. I took the diary. My hands were numb. Garrison stood a few feet away, his face unreadable. The other men in the bunker had gone quiet. Everyone had heard. No one spoke. The prisoner looked at me one more time. He was just a boy. "You know this now?" I nodded. I could not form words. The prisoner stood up. Garrison escorted him outside. The room stayed silent. I sat there holding the diary, staring at the last page, at the characters I could not read, but now understood. He was 15 years old. He did not want to fight. He wanted to go home. He was hungry. He was scared. He made a promise to his mother that he could not keep. And I killed him, not because I hated him, not because I wanted to, because he raised a rifle and I reacted faster, because that is what war is. A series of split-second decisions where hesitation means death, but knowing that did not make it lighter. I thought about his mother. Somewhere in Japan, near Hiroshima, a woman was waiting for a son who would never come home. She would not get a letter. She would not get a body. She would just get silence. And eventually, after the war ended, maybe a name on a list. Missing. Presumed dead. She would never know that he kept a diary, that he drew pictures of her, that his last written words were an apology for not being brave enough. She would never know that I was the one who killed him. I wanted to hate him. I wanted him to be a fanatic, a monster, someone who deserved to die. That would have made it easier. That would have let me put the diary down and walk away. But he was not a monster. He was a 15-year-old boy who liked drawing and wanted to be a teacher and was terrified and tried anyway because he thought that was what he was supposed to do. And I was the man who ended his life before he ever got the chance to become anything else. Brennan came back over. He looked at me, then at the diary. "You okay?" I shook my head. "No." He sat down beside me. He did not ask what was wrong. He already knew. Everyone in the bunker knew. After a long silence, he spoke quietly. "It was him or you. I know. That does not change anything. I know." We sat there together in the dark, and I understood something I had not understood before. War does not just kill bodies. It kills the story you tell yourself about who you are. I had spent 3 days telling myself I was a soldier doing my duty, that I had killed an enemy combatant, that I had no choice. All of that was true, but it was also true that I had killed a child who wrote letters to his mother in a diary because he knew he would never get to send them, a child who drew pictures because drawing made him feel less afraid, a child who apologized in writing for not being brave, even though the fact that he kept fighting when he was terrified was the bravest thing I had ever seen. I put the diary back in my pack. I knew I would never throw it away. I also knew I would never show it to anyone again. Some things you carry alone. That night, I did not sleep. I lay on my back staring at the concrete ceiling, and I saw his face. Not dead, not bloody, just calm, young. A boy who should have been in a classroom. I killed Takeshi Yamamoto on August 17th, 1944, and now I knew his name. I am 92 years old now. The war ended 79 years ago. I came home. I went to college on the GI Bill. I met a woman named Helen at a church social in 1948. We married in 1949. We had 3 children. I worked as an accountant for 37 years. I retired in 1986. Helen died in 2003. I have 7 grandchildren and 4 great-grandchildren. I lived a good life. But I never stopped seeing his face. Not every day, not even every week, but often enough that I learned to recognize the feeling before it arrived, a tightness in my chest, a weight behind my eyes. And then, without warning, I would be back on that island, standing over a boy who was still holding a rifle, still bleeding into coral dust, still 15 years old. I never told Helen. She knew I had been in the Pacific. She knew I had seen combat. She asked once, early in our marriage, if I wanted to talk about it. I said no. She never asked again. That was the deal men like me made with the people we loved. We carried it so they did not have to. I never told my children. They asked when they were young. What did you do in the war, Dad? I gave them the easy version. I was a Marine. I served in the Pacific. We fought the Japanese. We won. They stopped asking when they got older. I think they sensed that some doors should stay closed. I never told my friends. There were other veterans at the VFW Hall, men who had been in Europe or the Pacific or Korea or Vietnam. We drank together. We played cards. We complained about the government and the weather, but we did not talk about the things that mattered. We talked around them, like walking around a hole in the ground that everyone could see, but no one wanted to fall into. I kept the diary. I brought it home in my duffel bag in 1945. I hid it in a lockbox in the garage, under old tax documents and insurance papers. I told myself I would throw it away someday. I told myself it was just paper, just ink, just a relic from a war that was over. But I never threw it away, because throwing it away felt like erasing him. And I did not have the right to erase him. I had already taken his life. I could not take his memory too. Every few years, I would open the lockbox and look at the diary. I could not read the Japanese characters, but I had kept the translation the prisoner had written out for me on a piece of notebook paper. I would read it again. The same words, the same drawings, the same final entry. Please tell her I tried. And every time I would close the box and go back inside and pretend I was fine. But I was not fine. I had nightmares for the first 10 years after the war, not the kind where you wake up screaming. The quiet kind. The kind where you are walking through a jungle and you see a boy behind a rock and you raise your rifle and you shoot and he falls and then you walk over and he is still alive and he asks you why and you have no answer. And then you wake up and the room is dark and Helen is asleep beside you and you lie there staring at the ceiling and you do not go back to sleep. The nightmares faded eventually, but the guilt did not. Guilt is not like fear. Fear spikes and then passes. Guilt is slow. It sits in your chest like a stone. It does not scream. It whispers. And the whisper never stops. I started attending church in 1952, not because I found God, but because I was looking for forgiveness. I thought maybe if I prayed enough, if I confessed enough, if I lived a good enough life, the weight would lift. It did not. I raised my children to be kind. I gave to charity. I volunteered at the VA hospital. I did everything I could to balance the scale, to make up for what I had done. But you cannot balance a scale when one side holds the life of a 15-year-old boy. In 1994, 50 years after the war, I went back to the Pacific, not to the island where I killed him. That island was still restricted, still covered in unexploded ordnance and old bones. But I went to Okinawa. I visited the Peace Memorial. I walked through the museum. I looked at the photographs of Japanese civilians, Japanese soldiers, Japanese children who had died in the war. I stood in front of a display of letters written by teenage boys conscripted near the end of the war. Letters to their mothers, letters to their sisters, letters that said the same things Takeshi had written in his diary. I'm afraid. I do not want to die. Please remember me. I stood there for an hour, maybe longer. I do not remember. A Japanese tour guide asked if I was okay. I nodded and walked outside. That night, in my hotel room, I cried for the first time since 1945. Not because I regretted killing him. I did not. If I had not fired, he would have fired. If he had fired, I would be dead. I would never have met Helen. I would never have had my children. My life, and all the lives that came from it, depended on his death. But that did not make it clean. That did not make it right. It just made it necessary. And necessary is not the same as forgivable. In 2008, I told my son, not the whole story, just pieces. We were sitting on my porch drinking coffee, and he asked me, out of nowhere, if I had ever killed anyone in the war. I looked at him for a long time. Then I said yes. He waited. I told him I killed a boy, 15 years old. I told him the boy had a rifle. I told him I had no choice. I told him I found a diary on him. I told him the diary said the boy did not want to fight. My son did not say anything for a while. Then he asked, "Do you think about him?" I said, "Every day." He put his hand on my shoulder. He did not try to comfort me. He did not tell me it was okay. He just sat there with me, and that was enough. In 2019, 75 years after the war, I decided to find Takeshi's family. I did not know if they were still alive. I did not know if they wanted to hear from me, but I needed to try. I hired a researcher in Japan. I gave them everything I had: Takeshi's name, the name of his village, the date he died. The researcher worked for 6 months. They found records. They found a family registry. They found his sister. Her name was Emiko. She was 83 years old. She lived in Osaka. She had never married. She had spent her whole life waiting for her brother to come home. The researcher asked if I wanted them to contact her. I said no, because what would I say? "Hello, I am the man who killed your brother. He was 15. He had a diary. He loved you very much. I am sorry. Sorry does not bring him back. Sorry does not give her the 75 years she lost waiting. Sorry is just a word that makes the person saying it feel better, so I did not contact her. But I sent money, anonymously, through the researcher, enough to cover her living expenses for the rest of her life. I told the researcher to say it was from a veterans charity. I told them not to mention my name. It was not enough. It would never be enough. But it was all I could do. Last year, I burned the diary. Not out of anger, not out of shame. I burned it because I am 92 years old, and I will not live much longer, and I did not want my grandchildren to find it after I died. I did not want them to read it and ask questions I could not answer. I did not want them to carry what I had carried. I sat in my backyard on a cold October evening, and I built a small fire in a metal drum, and I placed the diary on top of the flames. It burned slowly. The pages curled. The ink darkened. The drawings disappeared. I watched until there was nothing left but ash. And then I went inside and I sat in my chair and I cried again, because burning the diary did not erase him. He is still there. He will always be there. I killed Takeshi Yamamoto on August 17th, 1944. I did not know his name when I pulled the trigger. I did not know he was 15. I did not know he liked to draw. I did not know he promised his mother he would come home. I did not know any of that, but I know it now, and I have carried it every day since. People ask me sometimes at veteran events what war taught me. They expect me to say something noble, something about duty or honor or sacrifice. But the truth is this: war taught me that you can do the right thing and still destroy a life. War taught me that necessity and morality are not the same. War taught me that you can survive a bullet and still die inside. War taught me that some weights do not get lighter with time. They just become part of you. I was a good Marine. I followed orders. I protected my men. I did my duty. And I killed a child. Both of those things are true. I do not know if that makes me a murderer or a soldier or something in between. I do not know if I deserve forgiveness. I do not even know if forgiveness is the right word. All I know is this: if you ever find yourself aiming at a boy, pray you miss, because even if you survive the war, you will never survive that memory. I am 92 years old. I lived a good life, but I never stopped seeing his face, and I never will.